5 days to go, and we're heading down the home stretch. So what would you like to talk to me about today?
How do you feel about the vote last night on Healthy Utah?
Disappointed. I think the presentation was good. I think that Senator Shiazawa was able to state the case for a fiscally prudent, conservative, common sense approach to an alternative to Medicaid expansion. And I'm disappointed that it did not resonate with all the members of the committee. It would be nice to have a floor vote and to have everybody have an opportunity to have a real robust debate, the pros and cons. It is what it is.
What happens now, Governor? Is Healthy Utah dead, or do you hope that there'll still be some kind of compromise that will include elements of your program?
Well, I'm not dead, and I can tell you that I will continue to fight for the taxpayers of Utah to be fiscally responsible with their dollars, to make sure that we have a benefit that comes with the taxes being paid that will help our people. I'm a Ronald Reagan Republican, and I believe in the safety net issues that he talked about, that we have a responsibility to take care of those who are most vulnerable amongst us. And I will continue to fight to do what is right for the people of Utah, the taxpayers, and fight for a better alternative to Medicaid expansion.
What does that entail then, though? They killed that bill. So what are you going to do?
Well, the fight goes on. There may be other ways to do it, and certainly we want to work with the legislature. I expect we'll be talking to the Senate and see what their thoughts are. That's where the Healthy Utah bill originated from, and we've made modifications and changes to accommodate the questions to try to address the issues that you even brought up. And unfortunately, one of the major issues is the sustainability of the Healthy Utah program and the ability to cap the cost. And we actually have worked with the Department of Health and Sylvia Burwell. I've talked with her personally. And there is an ability for us, in fact, to put in a cap and make sure we don't have runaway costs and expenses going forward. For example, like we've done here before with pension reform. A lot of you were here when we did pension reform, and it was not sustainable. We had part of it was that we had a benefit that had to be agreed to and maintained, as opposed to defined contribution. And so we ended up bifurcating that, and we had those who were in the program were able to stay on the program, but new people, because it was not sustainable, came in under a lesser program. Same thing could be true with Healthy Utah. We have the ability, in fact, to grandfather people in the program. This is something, again, the Department of Health has agreed to give to us, part of our flexibility that we have. So you can picture somebody signing up a Healthy Utah program, and 2 years later, if we think it's not sustainable for whatever reason, those people on the program are grandfathered. Nobody would have their insurance pulled out from underneath them. Whether they get a job or find other ways to get insurance, they gradually, through attrition, that number would get smaller and smaller. And of course, new people coming into the health care program of Utah would come into, if it was a Dunnigan type program or something else we decide that would be best, they'd come in under a lesser program, which the House at least believes is sustainable. So you can have the best of all worlds there. Certainly we have the ability to cap the ongoing costs, and we have the ability to not take away from somebody and pull the rug out from underneath them, those who've been on the program for 2 years.
Would you be willing to call a special session to work out a compromise?
I'd be willing to, yes. If that's necessary, that's certainly on the table as part of the ways to resolve the dispute, and certainly we'd be working between the sessions to come to some kind of consensus, but a special session certainly is an option.
If we have an impasse during this session, Governor, and we have to go to special session, can you comment about the opportunity cost to the taxpayers?
Well, we are sending the $800 million a year back to Washington, D.C. Everybody understands that. The public understands that, and they're saying, gee, that's not a very smart thing to do if we can't get anything back in return. I've talked about this being a conservative, common sense approach. Conservative thought says, let's not waste the taxpayers' dollars. And the net gain that wasn't brought up last night, where they talked about the 2-year program, because again, we've tried to address the needs and concerns of the House. So we've shortened the program to a 2-year pilot program. trying to again address that there's going to be an election in 2016, and the landscape may change. May not. Who knows what that's going to result in, but the 2-year program. But we've always talked about, the 2021, 6 years out. And what is the cost? The cost to the program that Representative Dunnigan's put on the table is going to be about the same cost over those 6 years to the taxpayers, about $236 million, either program. The difference is we bring back to the state of Utah in that same period of time, putting it into our economy, giving people more choice, private insurance, and a work program to help people get off of government assistance to the tune of $3.2 billion. Now, some of that money would come back otherwise, so what is the net gain? Well, the net gain is only $2.2 billion. But $2.2 billion, in my way of accounting, is a pretty large amount of money. And so the benefits are significant I think overall, when you look at the fiscal aspects of it, the long-term costs, those issues can be addressed. The public, clearly, when we see the Dan Jones poll numbers, which I think are pretty legitimate, when we see who's showing up here to the Capitol and speaking in favor as opposed to the few that are speaking in opposition, the public generally understands this concept and would like us to work out some solution. And so, I think the Healthy Utah is by far, in the comparison, the best option we have out there. But I'm going to look for a way for us to, in fact, come together, because unless we come together, we won't have anything.
So can Utah Cares support the prison reform, the criminal justice reform that the legislature is talking about? They want to treat people instead of sending them to prison. If with Healthy Utah, there'd be some treatment. With Utah Cares, there'd be less treatment. Have you looked to see if there would be enough treatment?
Well, from the people with the behavioral mental illness aspects of medical care, health care, they're saying there's not. With the Utah Care approach, the Dunnigan approach, that's just a classification in our society and part of our prison population that will not receive help. They do receive it under the Healthy Utah approach. Again, it's a more robust program. It gives not only more people care, but better care. And by the way, it's just typical kind of Medicaid insurance, but it's a private insurance, so it's better than Medicaid. You can pick and choose what's uniquely suited for your own needs, for your family. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So in every aspect, if you compare Healthy Utah to Medicaid, Healthy Utah, I believe, is a better program. Another point, Rod, and that is that when I've mentioned, we haven't talked about, where's the money going to come from on the Dunnigan proposal. It's going to cost, we believe, $77.2 million over 2 years. That's based on what we've estimated from our Department of Health and our Office of Management and Budget. They've been using about $65 million. We think they've underestimated the number of people that will be enrolled in the second year. But anyway, pick a number. But it's still going to cost us between $40 and $50 million more money over these next 2 years to adopt that plan. And the question is, where's it going to come from? Is it going to come out of education? Is it going to come out of infrastructure, transportation needs? Is it come out of money that would help to move the prison to another location? I mean, that's a significant amount of money. $50 million to be pulled out of the budget is a large number. So the fiscal aspects of both programs have got to be analyzed, and certainly that's a big part of why I believe Healthy Utah is a better fiscal conservative approach.
So at this
Governor, what
point,
are
as
the
it
six-
stands right now, would you be willing to sign Utah Cares if it ends up on your desk, or would you let it?
Well, it hasn't even got to the Senate yet, so it's early to say what I would do with that. Again, there's a lot of options and things that can happen between now and then, and I would expect that the Senate understands the fiscal constraints of adopting the Dunnigan proposal. I mean, that's a significant challenge and a big hurdle to get over. The thing that makes ours a little easier because it's so much more affordable, and we're using our own taxpayer. We're getting our own taxpayer dollars back to Utah, and with the higher split. And so, again, I think the Senate's going to have a hard time swallowing the fiscal aspects of the Dunnigan proposal.
Do you have 6-year figures on Dunnigan's, on how much would come back from the feds and how much his would cost over 6 years?
Do we have it? I'm sure we do.
Yeah.
I don't have it on the top of my head, but I'm sure we have that.
The other question I had is,
Representative Duncan keeps talking about do Healthy Utah second. Do his plan first, let it be the test, and then maybe go negotiate what you were able to negotiate.
Yeah.
Does it make sense?
I think there is some wisdom in putting them together. I think as I've thought about that, and I know it's been proposed by a few people out there, and I've thought about it, I think there is probably some merit. I don't think that's the right order, though. It would look like to me that doing the Healthy Utah first, where we get the most bang for our buck, help the most people for the lowest cost, that would seem to be a smart business decision. If we think it's not sustainable, or if we look at the landscape politically after 2017 and say there's going to be some changes and adjustments, the fallback position would be what they already agreed to as sustainable. So it seems to me that would be the right order of things. I have a hard time thinking of working backwards because we leave, it's about $346 million on the table the first year and about $400 million on the table the second year if we do it in reverse order. In fact, that just doesn't make fiscal sense to me. The math doesn't work.
Governor, you mentioned the prison again in connection with Healthy Utah. Is that still leverage in this whole debate? You're talking about taking money off the table to move?
I'm not talking about taking money off the table. I'm suggesting that anybody who looks at the budget and says if we do the Dunnigan proposal, then it's going to cost us about an extra $50 million. That's got to come from somewhere. And either it's going to come from education, infrastructure, other health and human needs, prison relocation. That's just one of many. So, I mean, we need to think through this and look at the big picture, not just in isolation. And it has nothing to do whether it should or shouldn't move or if we find a better location. I'm just saying that the fiscal aspects of this are $50 million is going to be found somewhere over the next 2 years to pay for that, and it's got to come from some other place.
When you talk about the PCN, the pretty crappy network, that's what one of the doctor's reps called it last night.
Well, again, we have a program there that's designed to help. It's a minimalist help, and I don't know if it's a pretty crappy network, maybe a little harsh, but I've heard a lot of medical professionals, doctors say it's better than nothing, but not much. And so, I mean, the limitations you've heard, and those in the medical field can probably explain it in better detail than me, but only having 4 prescriptions, it's primary care. You can't go to the hospital, you can't get secondary specialized health care. It is very minimalist of the minimal. And again, the question that the taxpayers are saying, why? We're paying for a better model, but we're being prohibited from using it. I mean, they talk about the Cadillac model. It's just a traditional health care, but we've paid for the Cadillac. And we're letting somebody else in Washington, D.C. or other states drive our car and coming back and buying a Yugo to go along with it. I mean, I don't understand the fiscal responsibility there. Again, conservative thought is don't waste the taxpayers' dollars. I've said to you before, my principles are pretty simple and straightforward. One, to the federal government, don't take the money from us in the first place. If we didn't have the Affordable Care Act, we would not be having this discussion today. I don't support the Affordable Care Act. I think it's flawed in its process and its inception and its result, compounded by the Supreme Court decision. So we've been dealt some cards. The question is, how do we best play them? The taxpayers of Utah are spending a lot of money back to Washington, D.C. We have to find the best way to spend them. So first, don't take the money from us. If you do take the money, give it back. And give it back in a block grant form or with maximum flexibility so we can find a more efficient and effective way to spend the money. We may not want to spend it, but better us to spend it than the people in Washington, D.C. who are profligate in their spending habits.
Yesterday, the LDS Church released the LDS Church and the legislature released the agreement on anti-discrimination. Does that go far enough in your eyes to reach that balance? You had expressed some concerns about the employment aspect of it previously.
Well, first let me just say I think it is a historical day, and I think that the House and the Senate and the folks involved in this have worked very hard. And I would say it's not just the LDS Church. I know they've had a significantly important role, but it's been other faith-based organizations too, and a lot of different stakeholders on all sides of this issue working hard to come together. And I applaud those people in the Senate and the House who worked so hard to kind of thread this needle. And as I look at the bill, and I think, you know, people are going to be happy on probably both sides. That's maybe the definition of a good compromise. And I think it is a good compromise, and I think it's a good model for the rest of the country. And if we can do it in Utah, other states can do it. There are aspects of it on both sides that they're going to complain about. But again, it's common ground. It's a compromise, and I support the effort, and I'm going to sign the bill.
How close
If
do
it
you
makes it
think,
to your desk.
Assuming that it makes it to my desk.
how close do you think the legislature is going to get to the $500 million benchmark you set for education?
Well, it's hard to tell. A lot depends on how you label education funding. Sometimes you build a building, for example, for education, and that's certainly part of the money. It may take away from the WPU to do that, and how you divide up the education dollars. But I just talked to Senator Hilliard earlier today, and at least from the Senate side, and he seemed to be optimistic that we'll have a good, robust number for education. He totaled up some numbers and said, hey, we may get to that 500 million mark. You know, there's just a lot yet to be done, and this is the crunch time as we get ready to the final week. Everybody has demands, everybody has issues and their pet projects, so it's hard to please everybody, even though we have a lot of extra money. But I fully expect at the end of this session that we'll have a significant number for public education. I hope a lot of that goes into the WPU, and I hope a lot of it goes to local control, where the local school districts have more discretion in how to spend the money.
Any other questions? Excuse me, somebody.
I was gonna ask about medical marijuana. If that gets through the Senate and the House, would you sign it?
You know, there's a lot of issues out there. I'm not comfortable with what I've heard so far. Our agencies are concerned about how do you regulate it, how do you enforce it, how do you dispense it, how does it impact us. This is a bill that came without much prior vetting, certainly not with the executive branch. And so we have a lot of questions, and our agencies have a lot of questions, and so unless I get some answers, I'm going to be very concerned about that bill. Hopefully, we'll be working with the sponsor of the bill and others to get it right, and either we'll get it right or it will be vetoed.
Governor, you got a letter yesterday from Mitt Romney, as did other Republican leaders in the state, urging all of you to support a presidential primary next year rather than the caucus your party is talking about. Where are you on that issue? Do you want to see a primary as well?
I would like to see a presidential primary for a number of reasons, but the number one reason is I want Utah to be relevant. And if we can have our presidential primary in conjunction with other Intermountain states, we've talked about this before, we end up as a block attracting presidential candidates who want to come here in Utah and campaign. I've said before, we have been too much in what I call the flyover zone, where people will land in the Midwest and fly over Utah to the West Coast, and maybe they'll wave at us as they go over, but I'm not sure they're waving with all 5 fingers. We need to present an opportunity for them to come to the Intermountain West and talk about public lands, to talk about endangered species, to talk about energy development. We produce more BTUs here in the Intermountain West than any place in the rest of the country combined. We've got some significantly big issues here that are different from the East Coast, the Midwest, and certainly the West Coast. So we ought to do everything we can to get those who are going to lead our nation to stop by Utah and talk to our people, understand the issues, and give a commitment about if I'm elected, then I will do what. So the presidential primary actually lends itself to that issue, and if we can combine that with other Intermountain states, we have an attraction to bring people here.
Why is a primary better than a caucus for attracting candidates? I mean, certainly the Iowa caucus brings in a lot of folks.
Yeah, that people pay money and they bus people in, and it's not really, I think, a true reflection of the people. We've never had a president that's won that's ever won the Iowa caucus become the president. I mean, it's not a great system. They're first in the nation. That's propelling. I think it's unfair, by the way. I've been critical of that. Iowa and New Hampshire being at the front of the line. We should have rotating regional primaries, number one, so everybody gets a chance to be at the front of the line. and every part of the country has a chance to participate. Why do we make a decision on who the nominee is going to be after the first 4 or 5 elections? You know, it's a silly thing. So rotating regional primaries would be a better process, but that necessitates every state to have a primary. And you can combine them at the same kind of times in the calendar. You could do it in 4 months. You could shorten the presidential campaign, make it a lot less expensive, allow more people to compete than just the rich and famous, and it would get, I believe, a better result. So I believe in presidential primaries. We've budgeted $3 million to have one in Utah. And again, it will help put us on the map. We will not get on the map unless we are consistently engaged in presidential primary elections. The caucus system, again, I think it's great. I support the convention caucus system. But for a presidential election, and it falls short. And again, how we're going to have people vote electronically that can't come to the caucus. And so there's a lot of questions out there that have not been answered on just doing a caucus.